here we have section 8.1. We're going to do part 2. We left off with the formula, if you will, for determining your income tax. So I have here a chart that you're going to use for your homework. I did copy this in your homework packet. We have 4 different filing statuses. You can be considered a single person. You can be considered married but file separately, or you can be married and file jointly, or you can be what we call a head of household. Head of household would be somebody that would be like a single parent would be head of household. We have different tax rates. Basically, the more you make, the higher percent of your income you have to pay. STD, that stands for standard deductions, and the one at the bottom is the exemptions per person. Okay, so suppose we want to calculate the income tax owed by a single woman with no dependents, whose gross income adjustments, deductions, and credits are given. Okay. So, we have the gross, we've got adjustments, we've got deductions, and we've got a tax credit of $500. So the first thing we want to do is figure out adjusted gross. Adjusted gross is the total gross income, subtract off any adjustments. Well, on the previous slide, it said we had adjustments of $4,000. So we're going to take our gross and subtract off the adjustments of $4,000. So adjusted gross right now is $48,000. Next, you have to figure out your taxable income. So you're going to take your adjusted gross and subtract off your exemptions and subtract off your deductions. Now, to figure out your deductions, you first want to figure out which is larger, a standard deduction or an itemized deduction. All right, so everybody gets one exemption per person. So she's a single woman with no dependents, so she's going to take off the $3,200. That's the one exemption she gets. Now let's look at her deductions. Standard deduction of $5,000. $5,000 a standard deduction. But can she deduct more by itemizing? So we look at her mortgage interest. She paid $7,500. She paid $2,200 in property taxes. She contributed $2,400 for charitable contributions and $1,500 for medical expenses. But you got to be careful with medical expenses. You can only deduct the amount in excess of 7.5% of gross. So in other words, you got to figure out what 7.5% of gross is. So 7.5% times the $52,000 is $3,900. So if she had $4,000 in medical expenses, she could deduct $100. If she had $4,000, she would be able to deduct $100 because that's the amount over the 7.5%. Okay, but she didn't even come close to the $3,900 for the medical expenses, so she can't count the medical expenses. Okay, so she's not allowed to deduct those. If you add up everything else, you see that she has deductions of $12,100, which is larger than the $5,000, which is the standard deduction. So she's going to take off $12,100. So once you subtract off the exemption, her single exemption because she's a single person, no dependents, and her itemized deductions, you have $32,700 that we can actually figure tax on. Okay, so we're not computing tax on her gross, which was the $52,000. She's only getting taxed on the $32,000. Now to figure out the actual income tax, you're going to look at the chart, and she has tax credits of $500. So once you figure out how much she has to pay per the chart, then you're going to subtract off another $500 that she doesn't have to pay. So you look at the chart for the 32,700, and that'll tell you what percent she's in. Let's see if we can find the chart here. All right. So she's a single woman. We're going to look in this column right here as we wait for the computer to catch up with us. Single woman. There we go. And we look for 32,700. Well, you notice 32,700 is in between the 29,000 and the 71,000. So she has a tax rate of 25%. This is where it gets tricky. She doesn't pay 25% on the 32,000. She only pays 10% on the amount up to 7,300. She then pays 15% on the amount that's between 7,300 and 29,700. And then anything that's over 29,700, that's what she pays 25% on. So you cannot multiply 25% times the 32,700. I wish you could. That would make life a lot easier, but it doesn't work that way. So let's go back, see if we can find that page again. Okay, she owes 10% on the first 7,300. So you would multiply the 10% times 7,300. Then you need to figure out how much she has over the 7,300, but less than the 2,970 or 700. And she pays 15% on that. And then anything that's over the 2,970, she pays the 25% on. All right, so this is where we have it. It's 10% times the first 7,300. So 10% times 7,300. Then to figure out what she pays 15% on, she's going to take that 29,700 and subtract off the 7,300 that she's already been taxed. Okay? And that's what you pay 15% on. Okay, so this is the upper limit of that 15% tax rate. The 29,700 is the upper limit. So we're going to take off the 7,300 that we already paid taxes on, and that's the amount that we're going to pay 15%. Next, we have one more. Okay, so we need the stuff over the 29,700 that she still hasn't been taxed on. So we're going to take her taxable income, 32,700, and subtract off what we've already paid taxes on, which is the 29,700, and multiply that times 25%. All right, once you put that into your calculator, you're going to add those all up, and she has to pay taxes of $4,840. But she has $500 in tax credits. So you take off the $500, and the total amount of taxes she owes for the year, $4,340. Figuring out percent increase. All right. This is true, but to figure out the amount of increase or the amount of decrease, here's what you do. You subtract the two quantities that you're given, and that gives you the amount of increase or the amount of decrease. So you subtract the two quantities, divide by the original amount, whatever the original happens to be. All right, here's an example as we wait for the computer. There we go. In 2000, world population was approximately 6 billion. All right, find the percent increase in world population from 2000 to 2150 using the High projection. This is an estimate. Okay, so find the percent increase. So we're starting at 6 billion right here. 6 billion. And the High projection has us at 30 billion. Okay, so we're going to subtract the two numbers. We're going to take the 30 billion, subtract the 6 billion, and divide by the original. So 30 billion, subtract 6 billion, divided by the original 6 billion. We started with 6 billion, so we divide by 6. Okay, so that will give us a percent, or it'll give us a decimal. We're going to change it to a percent. All right, part B, find the percent decrease. Again, you start with the original, which is 6. You subtract the two numbers, which is 4. So 6 subtract 4, divide by the original, which is 6. 6 subtract 4 divided by 6. Now be careful, if you have a percent increase, you can tell the number's going up. Percent increase, the number's going up. The percent increase has to be positive. Percent decrease, numbers going down, is clearly the percent, the numbers are going down. Percent decrease is always going to be negative. All right, so for part A, as we wait for the computer, we take the 30 billion, subtract the 6 billion divided by the original 6 billion, and you get a 400% increase. Now for the next one, you're going to subtract the two numbers, 6 subtract 4, divide by the original, which is 6, and you end up with 33 1/3%. So the low projection, a percent decrease, so we would either write it as negative 33 1/3%, or we would write it as a percent decrease of 33 1/3%. So as long as you write the word decrease, you don't have to make it negative. All right. The homework is 4 through 56, every 4.